Hi there, I'm Jason Jay. I'm a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management, direct the sustainability initiative here, and do a lot of engagement with folks around climate change using interactive simulation tools and lectures, but never stand-up comedy. That's a clear rule in my household that I do not attempt jokes. But I am here with Stuart Goldsmith, who that is his expertise, and we're here to learn a little bit about the role of comedy in climate change.
The reason I'm telling you this right off the top is so that you can understand that for me, someone who cares deeply about your opinion of me, it causes me almost physical pain to have to tell you that this show is all about climate change. I know, I know. It's essential that you understand that I'm not coming to this from the perspective of a scientist or an activist. I'm not an expert of any kind. I'm just you. So I'm going to talk to you about the climate for about an hour. It may feel longer.
Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Stuart Goldsmith. I've been a stand-up comedian for about 20 years. And just in the last 3 years or so, I've started speaking and doing stand-up exclusively about the climate crisis and sustainability and all of the other myriad problems associated with those topics.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, climate change and comedy seem like strange bedfellows, right? Like we might switch between data and graphs and stories. We might switch between, terrifying people with images of firestorms and electrifying them with aerials of solar panels, but it's all very deadly serious. So what's the role of comedy in all of this?
Thank you. So I think that I come to this. I kind of have become a climate communicator, but I've definitely come to it from a comedy background. I've done no training of any kind in climate. I don't have any degrees in climate or sustainability. So for me, it's simply the case that I talk about the problems. In comedy, we say the problems are the material. So most comedy routines you might care to name or that you can imagine would probably be about the problems of parenting, the problems of love, the problems of political problems, and so on. So the problems are the material. And I find as a creative person, as a stand-up comedian, I can only ever write jokes about things that I'm thinking. And so I was suffering from my own eco-anxiety, my own eco-dread. And I found that I couldn't help but write about it. Everything I wrote, I go, well, really what that's about is my fear of this or my fear of that. So I ended up writing more and more stuff about the climate and crucially trying to make it work in comedy clubs on Friday and Saturday nights to chicken in a basket type comedy audiences who were not expecting it and had not opted into it. And we might talk about that. That's a very unusual way to end up. I sort of ended up communicating rather than aiming to in some ways. So the place of comedy when it comes to climate communication is that, as we know, comedy is this incredibly vivid way of communicating with people, much like podcasts can be a sort of a hotline, a sort of a personal hotline to someone's real life. We all listen to podcasts in the bath or whilst walking the dog, or on long drives or walks. We have quite an intimate relationship with the podcasters. And stand-up, that can be used in a similar but different way, in a way to connect with people in a way that's sort of totally distinct as art forms. It's about saying the unspoken truth, making clear the thing which we all know but no one talks about. And so from my perspective, as a little bit of both, they're very, very happy bedfellows, because now more than ever, we need to be speaking those unspoken truths.
So it's a way to break out of what's sometimes called the spiral of silence in climate communication, where people don't talk about it because they think nobody talks about it, nobody can talk about it, and
Yes.
you kind of break that ice.
Absolutely. There's a thing that I love to do in shows where I solicit climate confessions from my audience. So this is to undermine this idea of the purity test, whereby we all individually feel like we don't have the right to have, we've all green hushed ourselves effectively. We feel like we don't have the right to participate in a climate communication. And I felt this myself because I flew to Portugal last year, or because I used disposable nappies for my second child because I couldn't be bothered with the compostable ones. And so all of those things, I found that I was feeling them myself years ago. I was thinking, well, I'm not the person to talk about this. And I just sort of realized, well, why ever not? Because I think probably other people are in the same bind as I am. And I think that's a really useful element of comedy communication. A good observational comedian, if you think of the Seinfelds of this world, what they're so adept at doing is noticing something that everyone has noticed, but that everyone hasn't noticed that they've noticed. So the ability to point that and go, oh, I do that. I'm pretty sure everyone does that. In comedy, you have to be specific. And the more specific you are, the more, ironically, the more relatable your material becomes. If you can really drill into the details of something that you think or feel about something, and rather than give a broad idea of it, really drill into the details, those are the moments when people go, oh God, yeah, me too, I do that. A lot of my sort of obsession now is trying to communicate about the climate in that way that we know that we have to, where, as you said yourself, if you say, here are some scary facts, people shrivel up and they resist them and they don't want to hear. But you can't really tell them the hopeful stuff without first establishing a groundwork of some facts that are sometimes quite scary. So I have a sort of a permanent ongoing challenge of how do I do that? What do I call the show? How do I try to get people to attend the show who haven't already opted in so much that I'm preaching to the converted? But I have a piece of newer material I'm working on at the moment, which isn't one of the clips that I've been able to send you just yet, but it's about veganism. And so the comic premise for me is that I can feel, I'm not a vegan, but I can feel myself in the kind of the vegan pipeline. I worry that I'm going to end up being vegan, not because of any ethical concerns, but because I'm driven furious by the inefficiencies of the land use. And so I can talk about that on stage and I can make jokes based on that, the bedrock of that idea. I'm becoming vegan, but not for ethics. It's quite an unusual thing that I can talk about. And I did some of this material at a gig that I run locally, like a sort of a school parent and teacher association fundraiser. And one of the parents came up to me afterwards and said, that is the most I have ever considered being vegan. Because I think all other communication about veganism through comedy is, it's either, oh, stupid vegans, oh, they haven't got the energy to raise their hands, you know, cliched stuff. Or it's, I, the comedian, am a vegan, and here's why you should be vegan. So to adopt the position of, I'm not, but I think I should be, and here's why, it manages not to. I'm particularly proud of that reaction from that gentleman, because I feel like that is emblematic of exactly what I'm trying to do, which is to say, this stuff is very normal and we should be talking about it all the time, rather than saying this is simply the purview of nice older couples who are wearing outdoor wear and hippies. Do you know what I mean? Because I think climate has a huge branding problem. Everyone I've met in the world of sustainability is a nice, outgoing, fun, vigorous person. But still, the idea of the person in the street is that climate isn't for me. So I'm interested in softening those boundaries and trying to draw more people into that conversation, all the while saying, hey, I'm not trying to draw anyone into a conversation here. I get to sort of have, as a comedian, I get to have my cake and eat it. I get to do material about activists, climate activists, in which I can say, hey, look, I'm not one of these climate activists, but isn't it interesting the way they think and why they do that and what their tactics are and why those might be useful? Without needing to commit to it myself, without needing to sort of plant a flag and go, I'm like this and you must be as well.
You know, when you talked about this confessional idea of like, oh, I flew business class or whatever, the disposable diapers, or you talk about like being vegan, like those are kind of at this individual level, right? And like part of what I think the climate communication conversation is about right now is how do we, is it maybe it was, you know, the carbon footprinting tool by the oil company and the recycling campaign by the plastic company that got us thinking this was individual responsibility in the first place. And we need to figure out how to mobilize collective action for systems change, for, you know, pricing carbon, or for, you know, moratorium on fossil finance, or things that are bigger than us. And like, is comedy a tool for political mobilization or kind of collective action building? How can it dovetail with other modes of organizing?
Yes, I think that's a really good point. And certainly those ideas about personal responsibility and personal choices and every little positive action you make is one vote in the right direction. Those were very much emblematic of my first show. Since then, as I've been kind of, you know, as I've been touring that show and writing the next show, certainly I'm having to, as I've learnt more myself, I've had to confront this idea that personal choice is important, but you shouldn't feel guilty. I'm reading Professor Catherine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us, at the moment, which I really recommend, in which I think she quotes someone called, forgive me if I get this name wrong, I think it might be Mary Anise Hegler. Does that name sound right to you? No, you don't know. It's fine. and what this lady is saying is that it's not our responsibility to feel guilty. That guilt is for the climate, is for the fossil fuel organisations. That guilt belongs to them. We shouldn't feel guilty about our personal choices. As you say, BP popularised the idea of the carbon footprint. It's essentially to hoodwink us into feeling like it's our fault and we can change. So I'm certainly becoming more aware of those things. And for me, there is a continually evolving question of how do I communicate those. Now, one of the things that I have learnt is, or one of the things that I was challenged with a lot in a few years ago, is people saying to me, your comedy lets off pressure. It's a pressure release valve. And maybe we need that pressure to build up a head of steam and actually motivate people to action. And I think that's a fair comment. I would say that when, as I mentioned before, the kind of the burnt out climate people, the value of that, people say, oh, you're preaching to the choir. People do preach to the choir. The choir will sing better. Exactly.
Yeah,
if you preach to the congregation, you make them feel better and you turbocharge their efforts and you make them feel less alone and afraid and burnt out. So those things do have a value. For me, part of my mission, and I love my job and I'm so thrilled and privileged to be able to speak to the people that I do, but I don't have 1 million social followers on any platform. I don't command a touring audience of, hundreds of thousands of people. But what I can do is I've tried to weaponize my own skill set, my own, what's kind of unique or unusual about me. I've always found that people trust me. All of my reviews say, as soon as this guy walks on stage, you can feel the audience relax and think, oh, we're in safe hands. And that's murder to a comedian. You don't want to be known as a safe pair of hands. You want to be out there with your leather jacket, your cigarettes, staring, riding a burning motorbike off a cliff. But the reality is, comedy, you have to admit, you have to accept who you are. You can't hide it. I always think of the singer John Darnell, who's the band The Mountain Goats. He's so cool, but he's cool in a tweed jacket with elbow patches. He's cool simply because he is honestly being his authentic self 1,000%. So I thought, what can I do that is a representation of my authentic self? And if it is that people trust me and I look nice and I sound nice and I look convincing in a suit, then actually what that's fed into over the last couple of years is this evolving mission to get the right joke in front of the right people who, with their hands on the levers of real power.
I love that. That's a great call to action for everybody. All right, well, let's hear some comedy.
There are certain organisations you can blame. Justifiably, there are certain large companies, big companies, that you can blame. Now, I realise if I use a phrase like big companies, that's kind of a bit of a tripwire, you might end up justifiably worrying that I'm some sort of ranting climate lunatic. Someone who's been on YouTube and done their own research. And I assure you, I have not. But you just need to take my word for it. There are companies, they're different sizes, and some are big. However, to stop that happening, there's another common tripwire in the show, I realised whilst creating it, that if I say too much data, if I say too many numbers, like if someone talks to me about the climate and starts going on about parts per million and all these data and stats, I can't pay attention. It just puts loads of space in between us. So to avoid that, I'm going to try and use as few numbers as possible. Every time we come up to a date, I won't say the year that something happened. I'll just say a chart-topping hit from that year. Okay, so "Toxic" by Britney Spears, yeah. So round about then, BP popularised the idea of the carbon footprint calculator. You'll remember that, the carbon footprint calculator. That was their attempt to put the onus onto us, to put the responsibility onto us for our carbon footprint, as if that's a problem of consumption and not production, right? So that was effectively BP saying, we, at Morally Neutral BP, have provided for you, scumbags, the carbon footprint calculator so that you can more accurately calculate and calibrate what terrible, terrible dickheads you all are for using our morally neutral product. You're welcome. And that's nuts, isn't it? That's insane. That's like when you sat in traffic behind a lorry and on the back of the lorry there's a sign saying, if you can't see my mirrors, I can't see you. And you just think, get bigger mirrors, you wanker! How is this my problem? You're the haulage industry. You solve it. Why are you putting this on me? As if the driver's heading back into the depot at the end of the shift. All right, Keith, kill any cyclists? Quite possibly. If only we'd managed to resolve the mirror issue that's vexed this industry for decades. Oh well. And I think there, actions like that, and an Extinction Rebellion action in particular, really kind of kicked me up the arse. It really sort of prodded me to kind of wake up my climate consciousness a bit more. And it was the one where, when scientists started gluing themselves to things. Scientists, you know, people who understand how glue works. Do you know what I mean? Not in the way you and I understand it, like, sticky, but on a molecular level. And they were gluing themselves to stuff. I thought, Christ, I've got to pay more attention. But the problem is, and there's something that's deterred me from speaking up for so long, is the fear of being labelled a hypocrite. The fear of being accused of hypocrisy, because it's so easy to get an activist on a TV show and for the interviewer to bully them and just be like, you know, how did you get to the studio, by the way? You used fossil fuels. Look at your phone, your clothes, your vehicle, your house, the way you lived your life. Everything in your life is bound up in the carbon economy, so you're a hypocrite. But how naked have I got to be before I'm entitled to an opinion? Do you know what I mean? There's no single sentence you can say that doesn't have some element of hypocrisy to it, because the carbon economy winds round us all like a boa constrictor. If you struggle, it squeezes harder. If you go limp, you die anyway. There's one. I've thought of one sentence you can say that doesn't make you a hypocrite, okay, on the climate. You can say this. You can say, I hate the climate. I wish it would burn sooner, and my actions reflect that. That's it. That's the only thing you can say that doesn't mean you're a hypocrite. And earlier this year, I was booked for an event in Zurich. And they got in touch with me and they said, would Mr. Goldsmith like to fly business class? Now, business class is the one bit that I hate about the whole experience, right? Because I hate walking through business class on your way to your bit, right? I lead a lucky life, and it's the only time in my life when I'm surrounded by people who think they're better than me and can back it up. So, to sort of walk through them, you know, like that, as they all look down their noses at you while seated beneath you, you know. I don't even know how it's possible, but they do. So when they said to me, would Mr. Goldsmith like to fly business class, I assured them in no uncertain terms that Mr. Goldsmith would, yeah, yes, make that happen, yes. And if I'm totally honest, when I was in business class for the first time on the other side of the looking glass, once I had been carried onto the plane by the pilot. There was a champagne cocktail for takeoff, don't mind if I do. Metal cutlery, because obviously terrorists can't afford business class. By the time I was on that side of the looking glass, I have to admit, when the other people came on, a tiny part of me did start to think, maybe I have worked that little bit harder. Awful! I turned into the monster I despise. Now, I arrived at the event. We did the session. It went great. We had a chat afterwards in the bar, and one of the people that worked there said, and I have since researched this, it's completely true. They said, did you know that business class generates 3 times the carbon emissions of regular flight? 3 times. And I can see some of you are like, I too have a confession. It's 3 times worse because of the extra space you're taking up, the extra weight that you're taking up on the plane. It's 3 times worse for your carbon footprint, 3 times worse for your emissions. So I made a solid commitment starting as soon as I got home. No more business class for me. In fact, I'm going to use it as an opportunity for some climate communication. Okay, so whenever I get offered business class now, I say thank you so much, I appreciate the offer, but I decline business class on climate ethics grounds. And I explain why. It's an opportunity to have that conversation with a new person who's in the field of, you know, booking flights for people and what have you. Maybe they'll pass that information on. Because I tell you what, flying is amazing. Business class, obviously, magnificent. But nothing feels as good as walking through business class. Knowing that you were offered it, but declined on climate ethics grounds.